Hi, I'd like to welcome you all to the 2015 ERCOT Summer Outlook. We're just going to wait another 2 or 3 minutes for any stragglers to come on, and then we'll get going with the presentation. All right. I'd like to welcome you all to the 2015 Genscape ERCOT Summer Outlook. My name is Eric Palmer. I'm the head of the ERCOT Analyst Desk here at Genscape. With me presenting will be one of our meteorologists, Leo Langlois, and our senior ERCOT analyst, Rodri Williams. I do want to point out, if you have any questions during the presentation, you can just type it into the questions box below the presentation and submit them, and we will get them and answer them at the end or throughout the presentation if we see them during the presentation. At the very end, there will also be a survey that pops up. We'd appreciate it if you could take just a couple minutes just to fill it out so we can make any improvements throughout the time. And I think from here on out, we're just going to start the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Leo, and we will begin.
Hi everyone, this is Leo, meteorologist. Then we will start with the summer outlook, but before starting with the summer outlook for this summer, I just want to go over a recap of 2014, the last summer, so we can make a comparison between our expectations and the last year, what actually happened. And also, we will also cover the wind obviously. So let's start with last summer. So this is a review of the whole season from July and August, and June, July, August, obviously. And so overall, last summer was a not particularly hot. It was especially very cool in the middle of the summer in July. July was very bearish, and then the warmer month was in August, but again, not very warm compared to normal. Last year, what was particular is that most of the warmth was located in the southern part of the state, and Dallas in the north in July was really cool. It was mostly driven by thunderstorm, as you can see. It was wet in the northern part of Texas in the month of July, and then August turned out drier, and that helped driving more higher temperatures and higher demand. So we see a recap of the June peak. June peak last year under 60 gigawatts, very weak. July equally as weak, under 65, so 63.5 gigawatts. And then in August we reached the peak of the summer, but not too impressive, 66.4, so lower than the previous years. We can look at a comparison of the previous years in the next, in the previous years. So we had last year we had only 36 days over the season that were above 60 gigawatts, and when we compare with the previous 3 summers, especially with a summer that was dry 3 years ago in 2011, there were as many as 63 days, and then the last 3 summers after that were not very strong summers. Like we ranged 36 to 40 days above 60 gigawatts over 3 months. And we see also, like looking at the average peak weekday, when we average out over summer, the values have been decreasing from summer to summer. So last year, the average peak weekday was only 58.8, and that is lower than 59 and 59. And the hourly peak have been decreasing from 2013 to 2014. And but 2014 was the weakest summer of the last 4 summers. Then the explanation of that is that the average high and low temperature for the summer last summer was much lower than it was low. So that's why we didn't reach 60 gigawatts in June at all last year, because the average temperature over all ERCOT on that day was 94 for the high, 77 for the minimum, and it was not very high values. And then in August, obviously, it's trending warmer, but again, not very impressive values for the past summers. And now we're just going to go over a recap over the prices, and I pass it to Rodri.
Hi everyone, thanks Leo. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of June, July, and August of 2014. So firstly, looking at June, as Leo mentioned, demand was below 60 gigs. As a result of that, volatility was fairly minimal. We saw predominantly positive DART spreads. Real-time pricing was averaging in the mid to low 40s, some 30s in there as well. Just to talk through the graph that you're seeing in front of you, the gray area chart represents peak demand. Green is the day-ahead price, the daily average for ERCOT's North Hub against the blue, the real-time. Then those orange bars down the bottom represent the actual DART spreads with day-ahead and real-time spreads. So as you can see, fairly minimal for June. Moving into July, we did start to see a little bit more variation in price, with demand coming up into the 55 to 65 gig range at times. We saw a little bit more pricing in the mid-month there, around the 13th, and then again through the end of the month. Again, prevalent DART spreads were positive, We did see certainly a dip in demand during the mid-month, which corresponded with lower real-time pricing in the 30s. But overall, not really a really significantly volatile month there. And lastly, looking at August, did see a stronger load overall. Leo mentioned the overall peak in August there. We did see some early volatility on that, the 8th there, where it peaked $122, corresponding with one of the stronger load days of the month as well, and indeed the summer. So you can see that although loads did remain strong in that kind of 60 gig range there, we generally saw weaker pricing throughout the remainder of the month, with the exception of that late rally on the 25th of August with the 66 gigs of load and $68 day ahead settled versus the much lower real time. So you could see certainly by the end of the month they were being a little bit more conservative with day ahead pricing. I think the exception to that was the 30th, where we did see a very strong negative DART spread with the real time clearing at 54.77. I also just wanted to touch on ORDC for the previous summer. So we looked at June 1st through to 31st of August. In total, there were 2,208 hours. Most hours with ORDC, the real-time price adder in there, were in the on-peak period with the stronger demand hours. Averaged about 37 cents for on-peak ORDC with a max at $71. Off-peak averaged a penny with a max of about 60 cents. So again, ORDC corresponding with those stronger load hours. The thinner surplus is really confined to the on-peak period. With that, I'm going to hand over to Leo, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the demand outlook for this year and some of the trends he's seeing.
All right. So the first thing that we want to look at is we want to look at the overall ENSO state. So we want to see how the El Niño developed like over the spring. Basically, this is a pretty significant change from what we had last year. So we had some very weak borderline El Niño conditions like late in the winter, but really not impactful until recently, going towards the summer. So it's something that picked up in March and developed into the spring. We can see the trend to the right, very warming of the temperatures over the equatorial Pacific. And by now, it is really pretty certain that this will persist through the summer and even into late this year. So it's definitely something to keep in mind that has impact and that was included in our thoughts. And also, if you've noticed very recently, obviously it rained a lot. It flooded in May. It rained a lot overall in the spring. The past 90 days have been one of the wettest stretch that Texas has experienced in recent times. And thus, the result of that is that compared to last year, if we compare late May last year and late May this year, it is considerably, the drought has been fairly eliminated. So it is not going to be a factor that we're going to consider into the summer this year. There is no impact of heat coming up stronger because right now the drought is not a non-factor. And also another consideration we have for the summer outlook is looking at long-term teleconnections such as the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, PDO. So what is that? So we're looking at the temperature anomalies in the Pacific Ocean, and we want to compare what happened earlier in the spring and how it's trending into the summer. And basically, we have a positive PDO there, and what it means is that we have a pool of warm water next to the coast of the west coast of North America, and we have like a cooler pool of water north of Hawaii, and this has been decreasing a little bit into the spring. So the intensity of that PDO has been decreasing. So it's something that we keep in mind that has impacts on the summer later on. And also we want to look at the tropical outlook, the tropical summary. We want to know about the hurricane or tropical systems that may affect Texas over the summer. It is an El Nino state this summer, and typically what happens with El Nino is that it creates a lot of shear over the Gulf of Mexico, and it prevents the development of tropical storms over there. The tropical storms are favored further west into west of Mexico. So for Texas, it's rather a low number. We're on the low end of number of tropical storms this year. So it's not going to be a great hurricane year for the Atlantic Basin, and thus it's not a huge risk, but we only need one to make significant impacts. So now we are going forward and looking at the average for the whole summer of our expectations for the summer forecast. So we went into the El Nino conditions and decreasing PDO. So taking both trends into account, our expectation for Texas is not for it's for a fairly bearish summer with the seasonal conditions around Dallas and below normal temperatures like further to the south, and also normal precipitation over the summer with some above normal focus on the Central Plains. Now we have to say early in June thus far it has turned drier after the considerably wet and cool May, and so it's dry, but the temperatures are near seasonal. So I do not think that the way June has been starting will really last into the whole summer. And overall, very mild summer compared to seasonal average. Now, why we came up with that summer forecast? We looked at many years that had similar El Nino and PDO conditions. So we're trying to find years that are similar to what our expectation could be this summer. And we see the years that we picked up. We picked up those years basically because the sea surface temperatures were matching, and the similar El Nino conditions, similar PDO. And we think that 1941 and 1987 are fairly good years. And we also added a couple of other years to make a forecast there. So we are thinking that overall Texas is not really favored to be in a strong anomaly on either side. And if it is on one side, it would be on the cooler side actually. And we can compare also with the long range guidance of models such as CFS, and it is indicating more of a cool and wetter risk relative to a forecast anyways. So it is not, as far as Texas is concerned, it's not contradicting the forecast. We're also interested to look at more of a monthly breakdown of the summer. So if we break down June, July, and August, now June has started more on the dry side. So it's starting drier, and it's near seasonal. The question is whether the remainder of the month stays as dry and near seasonal. I think overall for the remainder of the month of June, I still think that the below normal and the below normal temperatures will end up dominating, and I think that the current dry stretch that we're in is not going to last in the back half of the month, and then into July that would be a cool and wet pattern that we're expecting for Texas, and then in August, this is where we have more of a chance of getting near seasonal conditions, where near seasonal precipitation. So also based on the fact that August is typically the warmest month of the year, it should be the month where the peak demand will be reached. And therefore, we are not, because the drought has been eliminated, it might prevent a high number of days with a lot of triple digits because the soils are completely soaked by all the precipitation that has fallen into the spring. So we are not expecting anything like hotter than normal by any means. So when we put that all together and look at the expected peak for each month of the summer, for June, we are thinking that 60 gigawatts might be difficult to reach. It has been dry lately, so maybe it could be a value that is possible. It's a possible risk that we reach a value above 60 gigawatts, contrary to last year. But we still think that overall, most of the days in the month are going to be in the 50 to 60 gigawatt range. And if the rains start back after the back half of the month, if there's a day with thunderstorms, then it is possible we get at least 2 or 3 days below 50 gigawatts there. July is still expected to be cool and wet, and so we don't see there's no reason to think that we'll see many days above 60 gigawatts either. We should have many days between 50 and 60 gigawatts once again. However, compared to last year, we do not think that Dallas is going to be as cool and wet as last year. So we will probably reach a higher peak for the month of July this year than last year, but not by much, between 63.5 and 65 gigawatts, most likely. And then August is the month that is not going to be as warm as last year, but relative to the bearish June and July or expectation for this year, it's still going to end up the warmest month. So it's the month where we will have the peak. It's simply, we are not expecting a peak as high as last year. Last year it was 66.4 gigawatts, and because our expectations for August this year are slightly cooler than last year, we would have a peak that would be below 66.4 gigawatts. And on this, I'm passing it to Eric. Oh, and sorry about that. There is another section I forgot to cover. I'll apologize. We want to look at the wind very quickly. Let's look at the ERCOT wind climatology. The summer months typically are the months with the lowest capacity factor. So the wind tends to decrease from June into July into August. July and August are much weaker typically than June. And thus the average summer capacity factor is the lowest in the year, like about 28% for the whole season. So looking at more of a hourly trends during a typical day, and looking at months, like June has the highest level of wind, and and then going into July and August it decreased significantly. And the diurnal shape, it's a diurnal shape that dominates in the summer. We have the highest wind overnight, lowest wind during the middle of the day. This is very typical. It's just that it's decreasing from month to month. And our expectations when we compare with the last 3 years for this year, it should be slightly less windy than last year because we don't think that July is going to end up that cool compared to last year, and thus we think that it will be slightly lower than last year, but because it's not as warm as 2013 and 2012, we will see a little bit of a stronger wind season than 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And basically, southerly winds are going to be something that we expect in the western side of Texas, and also some sea breeze that would persist in the southern part of ERCOT. So this is and looking at the average wind for 2013 and 2014, when we make an average, it would be the wind is not it's going to be a fairly generous in general.
So I'm going to take a look at the market changes that are going into effect this year. What we're going to take a look at is, one of the major things that occurred this summer. It actually already happened on June 1st. Was the price cap increased to $9,000 per megawatt hour. The previous price cap was already, $7,000. But with the addition of ORDC, the ORDC price adder last June 1st, the market, ERCOT already had the ability to get the settlement point price to this $9,000 level already. So, I don't think really, there is an LMP price cap change this year. I don't think it's going to have a major significant impact on the market. Past 2 years, we've rarely seen, during the summer, the price cap or the prices get close to the cap. On occasion, we've seen some higher pricing, but, I think already, at these levels of price caps, loads, retailers, they're already conservative at these levels. I don't think, it's going to have a major impact or a major change on strategies by a lot of, smaller utilities and retailers. I also think that, the lower demand forecast, kind of a milder year, should keep, kind of the volatility down. So the next thing we're going to look at is the generation outlook for this year. And, there are a few additions. And the first thing I'm going to go over is, really ERCOT's forecasted resources and demand. So, according to ERCOT's, seasonal assessment of resource adequacy, there's about, if you subtract, all the capacity that they have in there, just the HSLs of all the units, the switchable, the PUNs, and then you subtract the demand forecast. There's about there's about 77,000 megs of total capacity that is expected for this year. ERCOT's demand forecast is about 68,000, so it is a little bit higher than ours. We are taking the downside to that. We do expect a lower demand clear, as Leo said, for this year. The risks, the typical maintenance outages that we've seen, 320 megs, very, very minimal. There should be almost no maintenance being taken during the summer. Typical forced outages, usually about 2,400 megawatts. So if you subtract that 77,000 number of total capacity by the maintenance and forced outages, you're still left with about 75,000 megs of total resources, net of the historic average of generation outages. So I do want to look at historical outages from last summer. We have seen some swings in the total number of megawatts that were on outage. So you can see last year, we swung from a little over 3,000 megs in the beginning of June, up to over 9,000 megawatts at one point when there were a lot of generators, were in forced outage. We did see that number drop to, back down to the 2,000 megawatt range in the beginning of August, and it just keeps going up and down. And this is ERCOT's published number that we scrape. It's the sum of all the HSLs of all the resource generators with a out status in their COP, and that's the total resource megawatt outage in green. The blue line on the graph is the intermittent renewable resource megawatts on outage. So those are your wind resources that are on outage. The next thing I want to take a look at is where are we right now in terms of outages, and put together a little graph about, so you can see how the outages changed over the course of the year so far. So, I mean, this is just from January to present, and you can see that over the spring, we had a lot of volatility. We had a lot of generation on outage. We had close to, I think, 28 gigs of generation on outage. Right now we're a little bit above 5,000, around 6,000 megs of generation that's still out in the beginning of June right now. And this is very similar to what we had last year. Something else that's interesting to note is that during the very cold months, during January and March, you can actually see when the wind had a lot of freeze off. So back in March, beginning of January, you can see those small spikes in the IR megawatt outages. This is just a quick graph that was pulled from ERCOT's State of the Grid report. It'll pop up in just a second here. It shows all the generation that was added in 2014. We had a lot of wind, about 1,500 megs of wind added last year. We had about 2,100 megs of gas-fired generation across the state and about 38 megs of solar. So this was added through, some of the units were there for last summer, particularly Panda Temple 1, and then as other units came online, the Ferguson and the Panda Sherman units, they came on throughout the summer last year as well. So for this year, what are we expecting for new thermal units? Well, the biggest one is Panda Temple 2, and we've already seen some generation online at that unit. Originally, we were also expecting, a new unit at the Ector County Energy Center out in West Texas. It was supposed to be about a 294 megawatt summer rating. They were also known as the Goldsmith Peakers. According to ERCOT, that unit has been delayed to the fall of this year. But right now, we've seen Panda Temple 1 Panda Temple 2 put the first generation to the grid on March 9th. The second unit there was seen running on March 19th. And we have a little graph of, from our ERCOT Power RT product. We can see that Panda Temple 1 on the right, Panda Temple 2 on the left. This was back on March 19th. They've been testing. ERCOT included them both in their summer SARA, and they've been running pretty regularly. So what other units are going to be back? Monticello 1 and 2 are still, and Martin Lake Unit 3 are expected to return from seasonal mothball. We've started to see some increased generation at those plants already this summer, but they are expected back for this summer. R.W. Miller was originally forecasted to be on extended outage due to insufficient cooling water, but with the recent rain, they are expected to be available for this summer season. And for now, I'm going to turn this back over to Rod, and he's going to talk about some notable transmission outages for the summer.
Thanks, Eric. So I wanted to just look at really the biggest transmission outage for each month. As Eric mentioned, there's very little generation on outage. There's also very little transmission on outage during the peak summer months. The first one I wanted to look at in June was some outages around Dunlap Tech Ridge and Decker Dunlap in the Austin area. This has been an area where we've been seeing some bullish LZAM congestion recently, and this looks to continue to be a risk with the Dunlap Tech Ridge scheduled outage that started last month. That's going to be going through until the end of the month. There's a short outage at Decker Dunlap as well during that period. So just to talk a little bit to these graphics, the one on the left is a screenshot from our Power RT product. I've just highlighted the Austin area there so you can see which part of ERCOT I'm referring to. The graphic on the right is a new product that we're looking at, the Nodal Market Insights product. This is the analysis module that allows us to map some of the transmission outages on the grid, as well as real-time constraints. So you can see the dotted red lines are directly from the product. Those actually show some of the 138 kV line outages that are going to be out during June. The two important outages I noticed there was firstly Dunlap Tech Ridge, that A, and then B, Decker Dunlap, and you can see the green arrow denotes the direction of the constraint there. So for June, I think certainly the highlight is probably going to be more of this bullish Austin load zone that we've seen recently. Moving into July, again, fairly limited on long-term congestion outages. The ones that I was looking at was a number of consistent outages at Lon Hill Smith on the 69 kVs. This line in particular was a problem area earlier in the year. We saw consistent downside Corpus Christi congestion around Lon Hill Smith. With that 69 kV line going out of service, it looks as if the congestion risk would switch to something like Sinton to Skidmore on 69 kV. So you can see on that map there, that's really the Corpus Christi area. You can see a number of line outages in the area there. The one denoted by A is the Lon Hill Smith, and so that's a very bearish constraint for some of the Corpus Christi generation, like the Oxy units, BM Davis, Nueces Bay. Tend to see upside on units like Rayburn, for example. And that's really the one kind of long-term constraint we've identified. And then lastly, moving into August, La Palma Villa Cavazos looks to be the consistent constraint. This is one that we've seen crop up recently with the Rio Hondo MB Central line outage. So there's actually a new substation at Paredes being constructed at the moment. So there's a couple of outages, Paredes MB Central and Paredes Rio Hondo, at B and C in particular. We've seen in the past when we do see south load zone move above 4.5 gigs and onwards, when we've seen instances where the Silas Ray gas unit to the south in and around Brownsville is not committed, that we tend to see that congestion show up. So moving into August, when you've got peak loads above 60 gigs, there's potential to see a little bit more of that congestion. When that congestion does hit, it's very bullish for the real time for South Load Zone. It's also a fairly attractive play in the day ahead. It usually consistently shows up as a day ahead constraint, and it's really around those Rio Hondo MB Central outages. There is a La Palma MB Ranger outage at the very end of the month that may drive some of this risk into the end of September. But from what we've seen so far this year, you really need the parallel lines marked at B and C at Rio Hondo and MB Central to really drive that constraint consistently. So just to summarize some of those points, as I mentioned, and as Eric mentioned earlier, there are very few line outages and very few generation outages. It looks like LZAN congestion is going to be bullish for June because of those outages in the Austin area in particular. As we get into July, it's going to be more about the imbalance in demand and generation. We have very few actual planned generator outages. So unplanned outages aside, it's going to be more around gen and load reacting with each other. So for example, some of the north over Houston constraints that we've seen in the past, you can see, for example, rain in Dallas driving flows towards coast load zone, or potentially lower day-ahead heat rates keeping some steam generation offline in Austin or San Antonio. And then lastly, in August, the valley outages appear to be the biggest drivers of bullish south load zone constraints. That may be aggravated exports to CFE over the DC Railroad tie will add to that. Frontera in particular is exporting about 150 megs. And any other unplanned outages in the valley is going to create more day-ahead congestion in particular. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand back over to Eric, who's just going to summarize some of these points.
Sure. So basically to wrap it all up, summer 2015, we're expecting to be near seasonal with above normal precipitation. We do expect June still to be under 60 gigs. A little bit cooler, a little more rain than last year. July should be a little bit warmer, between 63.5 and 65 gigawatts, but still cool and more precipitation, relative to normal. And we do expect a little bit, weaker demand during August year over year, under 66.3. Seasonal temperatures not quite as hot as 2014. More precipitation than we had in 2014. We do expect lower wind forecasts this year compared to last. We do have slightly higher wind in August of this year compared with last year. The wind is the lowest of the year in August. When we typically need it the most. So even though it's slightly higher, there's really not a lot of wind in the first place. We do expect the tropical storm activity to be low in the Gulf. Some of the major changes, the price cap has increased to $9,000. It's already occurred. We do have more generation online this year as well. With the Panda Temple 2 edition, some units that were on mothball that might not have been expected earlier in the year, like the R.W. Miller unit that is expected to be there this year. And I think with the lower demand forecast, still a higher wind year than 2013. We do expect the volatility to be on the lower side. We do expect a return of the positive dark spreads throughout the summer, especially with that higher price cap. And I think the only way you're really going to get that volatility to return is kind of your risk that you have every single day is if there's a miss in demand or a very quick drop in wind, or an unexpected generator outage, a trip of a major unit. That's the only real way you're going to get to see this volatility this year. It's not forecast to be a very strong year, and and then again in August, we have a little bit upside to wind, which should help out the situation just a little bit, even with the lower load. So that about does it. If you have any questions, please type them in at the bottom. I do want to say that you will get these slides in an email. We'll send them out either this afternoon or tomorrow morning. So you will get a slides if you haven't gotten them already, and there'll be also a recording of this presentation as well. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to look over the questions, and we'll answer any questions we can. All right, so we do have one question here about, it's for our meteorologist, Leo. What made you shift your forecast so much over the last week or two? So I'm going to let Leo handle this question.
Yes. So we made some significant change in the forecast in the last week and the last 2 weeks, basically, because when we made the forecast initially earlier in the spring, we were waiting a lot on that exceptional year of 1987, which was a very atypical El Nino. And what happened is that it was not producing the typical effect that we usually have with El Nino. Typically, you get the Midwest getting cooler, and you get warmer in the West Coast. And as the spring unfolds, we have seen that what was driving our forecast into one direction, the warmer direction for the Midwest, was not going to verify as strongly. So we decided to reduce a little bit the size of the anomalies over the Midwest. However, in the case of Texas, we had a pretty seasonal outlook in terms of temperatures and precipitation, not very strong anomalies, a little bit on the cooler and wetter side. So we've just trended a little bit cooler in weather based on the latest trends. So we just wanted to adjust with what we were seeing, and that is basically it.
We have another question. Can you clarify whether or not RW Miller, Martin Lake, and Monticello were included in the SARA? I did believe they were included in the SARA, and specifically for RW Miller, that one was, I think there was a brief description that said that, they would not be on, I guess, extended outage due to the cooling water. So the way we read that is that unit should be available for the summer. So there's a few other questions, but they're very specific. We'll get back to you by email a little bit later today or tomorrow with some answers there. If you do have any other questions that you think of after, you can feel free to email me or anyone on my team. My email is epalmer@genscape.com. I want to thank you guys for joining the 2015 ERCOT Summer Outlook. And I look forward to speaking with you soon. Thanks. Take care.